In this video I am going to explain my psychotic break I had when I was first diagnosed with schizophrenia. The type of schizophrenia I have is schizoaffective disorder. I was diagnosed years ago with paranoid schizophrenia in 2003, and that diagnosis changed over time, or I was incorrectly diagnosed. A lot of schizophrenics don't even remember their psychotic episodes after they have been recovered out of their psychosis. I had my first and only psychotic break, which was on my senior year of high school. I was hospitalized and taken out of school, where after leaving the hospital I never finishing my treatment there. I was homeschooled for the rest of the year and was lucky that I was able to graduate high school, which I almost didn't, and not because I had failing grades. No one at the time really understood me during my psychotic break, not my friends, family and people I had contact with in school. I happen to remember my delusion, which was part of my psychotic state, and a few years later I wrote it down. In my room at night, sometime before or during my psychotic state of mind, I would hear voices that would say things to me like "get him" or "poke him" coming from my closet in my home when I was trying to get to sleep. The voices were very similar to adolescent black guys. When I was hospitalized I acted very strangely, like for example, I thought I was Jesus for a day. I also acted very strangely when I got out of the hospital, and remember taking a very hot bath because I somehow thought it would turn my skin more brown and make me look more Hispanic by being in the water for hours, which was a bit bizarre. Now I will explain my delusion, which was part of my psychotic state I fell into before and during the time I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, although I don't remember my earliest or first stages of my psychotic break. To the best of my ability I will not try to describe my psychotic state in fragmented parts of speech or distorted thought. In my psychotic state I believed that the reason why poverty hasn't been alleviated in America is because of great schemes which caused the event or system of events to occur in America during the early 1900s. Because I believed that these schemes and events actually took place, I became very mad about the whole idea of it all. I thought that it was corrupt and that I had a special role to play in it all, but that comes later. Anyway, I thought that because the schemes worked and were successful, that it created a new barrier of inequality in American poverty that made it harder for poverty to be alleviated. These schemes were great unethical or immoral exploitative acts committed by the rich towards the poor working class. I also believed it was due to government oppression towards the poor working class, which was directly linked to economic exploitations of the rich. Although these exploitative acts committed by the rich did not pertain to or go against the law, it certainly affected the lives of the poor by putting them out on the street. Most of the riots were about the workers not getting enough pay to live. These riots didn't last too long because the government oppressed the riots down by using force. Once the riots died down over time, there was nothing more the poor could do. The reality of the poor working class was changed upside down. I can't remember how the poor working class was changed upside down in detail, but I can describe it in a metaphor by saying the very people that were once stable have been twisted into oblivion by unjust forces. Because I thought that all of this actually took place, I also thought that the events would lead to the creation of the middle class and repression of the poor class, which would change the poor into the ghetto class of the future. This in turn would spark a revolution of gangsters, criminals and all-around poor people to fight against the rich to set things back into place so that there would be a better life for everyone. I basically thought that the middle class was created out of the hard work of the poor and the corruption of the rich. After the middle class was created, the government would blind the middle class by filling their heads with lies and propaganda so that when the poor would try to tell the middle class what is going on, the middle class would not understand what the poor are talking about, thus would give the rich and government the opportunity to control the middle class minds. It is like a tug-of-war with the rich and government being on one side, the poor on the other side, and middle class is being tugged as the rope. As of the mid-1990s to 2003, the winning side is the rich and the government, while the poor is the losing side because most of the poor population have been killed off by the rich and government. I thought that the rich wanted to kill off the ghetto class because of their fascist vision of how the nation or world should be. I thought that any generation would always remain at the same poverty level in history except for a few. What I mean by that is that someone who is from a poor background will have their next generation be poor as well, for someone with a middle class background will have their next generation be middle class. A person with a rich background will have their next generation be rich, and so on. The few are the ones that are from one poverty level, and due to special circumstances they get to move up through the poverty chain. I also thought that once a person moves up through the poverty chain they change over time and their perspective changes on how they see reality. I thought that if you were poor or from the ghetto that you had special abilities that the middle class, rich and government people could never have or inherit. One of these abilities is that if you were a thug or gangster then you could see the beginning of the end of the world apocalypse. Of course I thought that during my psychosis that the end of the world was starting. I also thought that thugs and gangsters could sometimes hear or see dead people that they knew, and that if a thug or gangster dies that they could possess a person's body and take the body over if the person's soul isn't strong enough to take its body back. A special ability that all poor people had according to my psychosis was that they could communicate with each other by telepathy, but only could do it after a while by closing their eyes and quieting their minds when nobody else is around them. They only use the ability for emergency purposes, and if they stay in the trance for too long they can die. Another special ability is that the poor had special blood. This special blood would give them the ability to be able to withstand more pain and be more immune to pain than someone who is not poor. Another ability that poor people had was that they knew ghetto science tricks. I called it ghetto magic when I was in my psychosis. An example of ghetto science would be to make yourself look like you're hugging someone out on the street but you're actually exchanging drugs for money or vice versa. Another trick would be to put on some raggedy clothes, go out on the street and pretend you're homeless to get extra cash. One thing that I thought about poor people was that they all knew how to fight, even the gay ones. I thought they got into fights almost every day. The middle class people get into fights at least once or twice in their lives, and it is not as violent or last as long as the ghetto fights. As for rich people, I thought that none of them knew how to fight and would never have to fight because they are protected by money. In my psychosis I thought that the less money you have, the tougher you are. For example, if you are a bum you can beat up poor people, middle class people and rich government people. If you are a poor person you can beat up middle class and rich people but not bums. If you are a middle class person then you can beat up rich/government people but not poor people and bums. If you are a rich/government person, you can only beat up another rich/government person unless you have joined the military, police force or have started out being a middle class, ghetto person or bum first. I thought that police were all bad and liked to harass, beat up, get poor people in trouble or even kill them sometimes, except for the good cops, which I considered them to be from a ghetto. I thought that the government and rich people wanted to oppress and turn the poor against each other, except for certain rich people that didn't start in the rich life. I thought that the poor had to stick together as a group of communities so that they could fight against the rich or government. If a community did not stick together and started losing against the rich and government, they would die off. Their neighborhoods would be completely obliterated and a new neighborhood would be put in place of the old one like nothing ever happened. I thought that if a poor person ran away or would try to escape from their community then they would be considered a traitor and a coward because they would be no longer pitching in for their community, which is to fight against the rich and government. I thought that my mom and most of her side of the family were the only traitors out of all the poor communities of America. I had a delusion that my mother's side of the family was from the ghetto once I discovered about the history of where they were from, which I greatly misinterpreted. It started when I remembered my grandmother telling me that my great-grandmother's parents were German immigrants and moved to the Bronx, New York, where my great-grandmother was born. She grew up there along with her sister and cousins in the 1920s. Her father worked in a bakery while her mother worked in a restaurant cooking. When my great-grandmother reached womanhood she married my grandfather, who came from Mexico, was drafted into the army and fought in France during World War II. Later my great-grandmother and grandfather moved to Queens, New York, where my grandmother and great-aunt were raised. I thought that the whole Queens area was ghetto, not realizing that not all parts of Queens is a bad place to live. My grandfather and brother were from Harlem, New York. I thought that because everyone from my mother's side of the family was ghetto, that I, my brother, sister and cousins were all from a ghetto bloodline of people. For these reasons I came to think that if my family on my mom's side were ghetto, then why is my siblings and my cousins not ghetto? We had the money, the behavior, the attitude and everything that goes with being a middle-class person. Because I thought that my grandmother was a traitor for breaking away from her community by divorcing my grandpa and marrying a middle-class man for his money so she could save up and move with him into a middle-class community which was out of state, which is the whole reason why I thought she left. Because I thought that my great-aunt, my great-aunt's children, my mother and my aunt all considered themselves traitors. They decided to hide it from the next generation, which were me, my siblings and cousins. I also thought that they purposely lied about where they came from as we were growing up to protect us from something, even though I thought that betraying the poor community was wrong. I thought that things would have been right if my family members from my mother's side did not move out of Queens and raised the next generation the same way, which is the way I thought my generation was supposed to be raised. While I was in school I thought I knew the truth about why things were the way they were for me in grade school and up to high school. For example, in high school I thought there were 5 major groups of people and each group had subcategories which were called cliques. This system is like a monarchy or worse, a tyranny. The most powerful group was the popular kids, the second was the regular or cool kids, the third was the nerds, idiots or dorks, and the last was the losers, outcasts or rejects. I thought that outside of school the government/rich people are in control of society, but in school the poor or ghetto class kids control school life. What I meant by that was that ghetto kids are nothing outside of school, but in school they are on the top. If you were ghetto, you would be a popular or cool kid. If you were a middle class kid, you would be a regular, nerd, dork, outcast or a loser. If you were a rich kid, you would be either a popular kid or a regular kid. For really bad high schools or ghetto high schools it worked a little differently. There are no losers or outcasts. There isn't a regular group of kids either. There is only 3 groups. The first group is popular kids who are also cool, the second group is the cool kids, and the last group is the nerds. There really isn't any clique at all in the bad schools, only the 3 groups. The popular kids who are also cool would listen to underground or old school rap, some R&B, while the cool kids listen to either the same thing or classic rock but not 1950s rock, and the nerds would listen to nothing. Because of my delusion of what I thought about bad high schools and the high school I went to, I thought that my place in high school was outcast or a loser, but once I found out about my family's background I grew very furious and thought that every negative thing that happened to me in high school shouldn't have happened. I thought my place in high school should have been a popular kid instead. Also, because my family came from a ghetto bloodline, I should have been a cool kid as well, which would have made me a rarity in my high school. That is the end of my psychotic delusion. I haven't heard any voices for years or had any major delusions, and probably never will as long as I am on medication. I am doing better now and haven't really heard of any voices for years and haven't had a delusion since then. I do, however, experience anxiety and can get easily distracted when there is lots of noise around me, but I am learning to manage that.